The final round of the World Blitz 2021 was a one-game shootout between Alireza Firouzja with white and Levon Aronian with black. So Alireza goes for this Italian game, starting with bishop to c4, and this is what he actually played in the FIDE Grand Swiss, where he played an epic queen sack that I covered recently on the channel, so I'll link that one here on screen if you want to check it out after this video. And we had this line where black plays an early d5, so white captures here, the knight recaptures, and now we had rook to e1. We had bishop to g4, there's a lot of pressure against d5, that's one of the drawbacks of the early d5 rather than d6. And now we had pawn to a4, so in the epic queen sack game, Alireza went knight b to d2, but here he goes a4 instead. Levon goes pawn to a5, and we actually transpose back to that game, but with these a4, a5 moves included. So pawn to h3 now, the bishop drops back maintaining the pin, and now knight b to d2. The black knight drops back into b6 now, hitting this bishop and opening the d line, and after bishop to b3, which Firouzja played, this is where Levon actually went in, took the plunge, a really fighting decision, and took that pawn there. That's not what we saw in the game I previously covered. So it's double-edged playing like this. You have won a pawn, the computer loves it, but you're now going to come under some pressure. So the knight takes on e5, hitting the queen here, but you're also leaving your own queen to be taken. It's not actually good for black to go in for this line, because after the knight takes here, let's say you take the bishop on b3, you take this one on c5 as the best move, and now after the bishop drops back, this is just a bit better for white. So Levon didn't do this. Instead, after knight takes on e5, hitting his queen, he dropped it back to f5 here. And now Firouzja has to deal with the fact that there's a threat against his queen by the bishop, and his knight is attacked twice here by knight and queen. So he does this by retreating the knight, which is basically the only move. And now Levon brings a rook across to the d-file, staring opposite this queen, and that's why Firouzja now plays queen to e2, stepping out of that. And Levon now has to deal with the threat of pawn to g4 from white. So he does this by moving the queen out of the way. He goes all the way back to c8 here, which might look kind of strange, but it does sit quite well there because it doesn't block the d7 square for the knight if that ever wants to reroute. And it wouldn't sit very well on f6 because then it's running into knight e4. And that's the move that Firouzja now plays, hitting this bishop, opening up his own bishop to develop, and best here for black would have been rook d to e8, or possibly going with the other rook, but basically you want to bring a rook to the e-file and pin that knight. And white is still better here. The best move in the position is actually playing bishop to f4. It might look really weird, but there's some tactical reasons why you can't actually win this knight on e4 despite the pins. You can't move the f-pawn because it's pinned, and if you drop bishop to g6, then basically you can move your queen out of the way, and you can't win this piece as black. Knight h4 is coming. There's various tactical shots that mean you can hold on to this knight in the long run, but we didn't see any of this on the board. Instead, after knight e4, we had bishop to e7, and after bishop to f4 developing, we can see the difference between the two positions now. The minor pieces for white are just superior than the black minor pieces here, controlling a lot more territory on the board, and that's one of the problems now for Levon, that he's just getting a little bit cramped. So we had rook f to e8 now, centralising the second rook, and a great move by Firouzja, queen to b5, coming off this e-file and coming to this really active b5 square where it looks in all these directions, really powerfully situated. So the bishop has to retreat, it's attacked, it comes into g6, and Firouzja now plays that knight into g5, great move, looming over the black position here. He has such a sense for the attack, and you don't want to go pawn to h6 here as black. That would be a bad move that many of us would play in blitz, because there's a really nice shot here. If you want to pause and look for it, then please do so. And if you're enjoying this video, then do hit that subscribe button to never miss another. So you could play knight to e6 here, really nice. You can't take with the pawn, or you take back with the bishop, check, and you're winning the queen. And if you therefore play something different, like moving the rook up to d7 to get away from the attack, Well, now we can actually take that pawn anyway, because after the rook recaptures, we pick up the knight on b6 that's now no longer defended. That's where that beautiful queen comes in. So coming back here, Levon didn't play pawn to h6. He has a better sense than that. He played bishop to f6, opening up his rook. Arguably better would have been to chop here and try and get an attacker off the board, but okay, he goes for bishop f6. Now Firouzja plays his knight to h4, looking to pick up that bishop, another good move. And here Levon wants to move that bishop into e4, but right now this knight is controlling that square. So this is why he now takes the knight on g5, and hence why he arguably should have taken it earlier and not lost that tempo. The queen now recaptured, bringing that queen into the danger zone here, and there's actually a threat to now take this bishop twice because this pawn is pinned. So the bishop comes into e4 now, and again there was an amazing shot Firouzja had here, which was rook takes on e4. You're never going to see this in Blitz, but the idea is that now you've got access to the f5 square for the knight. But probably why Firouzja didn't go for this is that after pawn to g6 and queen to f6, threatening here and here, if you see that black can take here, you probably reject this because you're looking at queen takes and it's no good. But white can actually play bishop takes here, and after the king steps away, you have this amazing checkmate using both bishops. But okay, we didn't have this. You're not going to see that in Blitz chess. There's no time to calculate that kind of stuff. Instead, we had rook a to d1, bringing another rook to the open file. We had this exchange down here, the rook recaptured, knight to d7, bringing that one into the game. It's got no jumps here, as we can see. Now we had knight to f5, and here Aronian chops that one off, the queen recaptures, and now knight to f6. So these queens are now staring at each other. You could actually take here. This would kind of be a more Magnus way to play. You've got the bishop pair, you've got the better rook, lots of long-term pressure, nice endgame. But Firouzja loves to attack. He keeps those queens on the board. Now we had pawn to h6, bishop to c2 here, and here Aronian commits a fatal blunder, rook to e6. This is Blitz and you miss things. So now we had bishop to f5, skewering these pieces, and after the knight moved back, Firouzja picks up this exchange. So the queen recaptures and the pawn took here on b7. So now you have an exchange and a pawn, so really too much when you're playing such a strong player like Firouzja. We had pawn to c6 now, and pawn to b4, getting that queenside majority going. The knight came into the centre here, hitting bishop and pawn. Queen to b8 check now, the king stepped up, and now the queen comes back to e5. You're very happy to trade pieces when you're ahead like this. Aronian comes back, we had takes on a5, and now queen to a6, looking to recoup that pawn. We had bishop to d2 now, threatening this c4 move if the queen takes here, but actually Aronian's seen he can take here, because now you can't go c4, or the queen takes here. So probably Firouzja missed that when he played this bishop d2. And I should say, by the way, that you don't have time to take here or you lose the rook. So after this queen took on a5, instead Firouzja goes queen to d4, just holding this pawn. Now we had c5 hitting the queen. We had queen d3 check. The king moved away, and now queen b5, again trying to force that trade of queens. Aronian wasn't having it, queen c7. Rook e1 now seeks to activate. Pawn to g5 from Aronian. Pawn to a5 from Firouzja. And this is a massive problem for black, as we can see, storming down the board. King g7 now. Pawn to a6. Pawn to c4. Queen to b7. Again, Aronian ducks this exchange. He has to keep queens on the board if he's going to get any play. Pawn to a7 now. Knight to c7 covers that square, but here the pawn is just going through anyway after this series of moves, and bishop d4 check centralising. The king moved up and the pawn queened. So the knight had to give itself up, the queen recaptured, and now after f6, queen e8 check, Aronian resigned. The game is gone. So Firouzja ended up tying first place with MVL and Duda, but he missed out on tie breaks, which meant that MVL and Duda played the playoff game. If you want to see that amazing game, then do click here, and subscribe to the channel, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.